Fourth grade, don't mind the little boo-boo that I made in my table of contents. By the time you're watching these videos, the typo's been fixed on your papers. You will be okay. But I've mixed up the titles of yesterday's lesson and today's lesson. Yesterday, we were comparing mixed numbers of various forms when we were studying 9 and 10. Today in lesson 11, we're going to be comparing mixed decimals using a number line tool. So take a moment to fill in your table of contents, pause the video if you need to, and let's get going afterward. Our objective today is that we can compare the value of mixed decimals utilizing a number line tool. So you can see two number lines here and a series of decimals, and you might even see that next to a decimal, I've placed a template for us to convert that decimal into hundredths. The reason why is because I want all of my decimals to match each other before I place them on the number line. And I can't change them all into tenths, but I can change them all into our smallest unit, which is hundredths. Which means it might be easier for our number line if we change our benchmarks to hundredths as well. Instead of 5 tenths, we can call this 50 hundredths, 60 hundredths, 70 hundredths, and 80 hundredths. Where we can count groups of 10 in between, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, and so on all the way down the number line. Let's start by converting this first decimal, 6 tenths, into hundredths. 6 tenths, well, we actually just did that down below here, is the same as 60 hundredths. I learned in yesterday's lesson that if I have tenths and I have a blank space in the hundredths place, I can just fill it with a 0. So now that I know that 6 tenths is equivalent to 60 hundredths, I can plot that on my number line. Since it's already labeled 60 hundredths, I won't label it again. Next is 76 hundredths. I'm going to start by looking at my whole number. Since all of these are 0, that means it could go anywhere on this number line. Then I'm going to look at my tenths. Since it's 7 tenths, I know I have to go past 5 tenths. I have to go past 6 tenths. And here's my section right here for 7 tenths, between 70 and 80. And I want to go to 76. 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76. And I'm going to label it with the decimal 76 hundredths. Now I'm going to place 53 hundredths. I know 53 has to fall between 50 and 60, so I'm going to start at 50 and count up 3 more hundredths, which are these tick marks between. 51, 52, 53. And I'll label it 53 hundredths. Now I have a fraction that I need to convert into a decimal. I've learned from lessons past that 5 tenths can be written as a decimal with 0 whole groups and a 5 after the decimal point. But I also want all of my decimals to be written in hundredths. So since I have this blank space right here, I'm going to put a 0 there. 5 tenths is the same as 50 hundredths. And I'm going to plot that point right here. It's already labeled for me, so I'm not going to label it myself. All right, let's practice again with 79 hundredths. We have 0 whole groups, 79. Now I'm going to place this on my number line. I know I have to be between 70 and 80, and I know that 79 is 1 less than 80, so I only need to make 1 backwards hop right here. And I'll place 0.79 there. All right, last one. 67 hundredths. It's already in hundredths for me. All I have to do is place my numerator behind the decimal. 67 hundredths can be written as this decimal here. Now I'm going to plot it on my number line. I know it's going to go between 60 and 70. 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67. Our objective says that I can compare those though, which means I'm going to be using these symbols, greater than, less than, or equal to compare the decimals that are plotted on this number line. I'm going to start with the one all the way at the very beginning and work my way up. My smallest decimal, the one closest to the beginning of the number line, is plotted at 0 and 50 hundredths, which is less than our next decimal, 0 and 53 hundredths. Keep moving up the number line. My next point is at 0 and 60 hundredths, which is less than, go to the next number, 0 and 67 hundredths, which is less than, keep going, 0 and 76 hundredths. And finally, our last point right before the end of our number line, 0 and 79 hundredths. For this next number line, we're going to get a little bit trickier because our mixed decimals are going to be greater than 1 whole. You can see looking at this number line, we're going to have 8 whole groups and 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, and 4/10. And you can also see that our numbers are going to be written in ways that are not decimals and hundredths, and we want to change them all to hundredths. Let's start with one that would be simple for us to convert. I'm going to skip all the way over here to 8 and 1/10. I know simply I can plug in my 0 to make 1/10. But just like last time, they set up our number line so they weren't in hundredths, they were in tenths. So I'm going to also change my number line to hundredths decimals as well. And really easily I can spot that 8 and 1/10 or 8 and 10 hundredths is at the front of my number line. I don't need to rewrite 8 and 1/10 because it's already there. Next, I'm going to take a look at my unit form. I think this would be my next least challenging to go to, and I'm going to work up to my trickier ones after that. 8 ones, my number before the decimal, and 15 hundredths. I know all of these are 8 ones, so I'm going to look at these 15 hundredths. And I know that 15 would fall somewhere between 10 and 20. I'm going to count up my smaller notches to find where 15 should go. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 8 whole groups, and 15 hundredths would go there. Now let's look over at this fraction right here. I know that it's an improper fraction because it takes 10 tenths to make a 1 whole. And I can see here that 82 tenths is much greater than that. I can pull out 8 whole groups because 80 tenths equals 8 whole groups. Then I'm left with 2 more tenths. Since this is written as tenths, I'm going to change it over to hundredths by plugging in a 0 where I see that blank space. And then I'm going to mark where I can find 8 and 20 hundredths on my number line, right there. All right, next I have 8 whole groups. And luckily for me, the fraction is already written as 27 hundredths. So now I'm going to place where I think 27 hundredths would go. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. 8 whole groups and 27 hundredths. All right, our last one. 832 hundredths. Again, I know 100 hundredths makes 1 whole. So 800 hundredths would make 8 whole groups. If I pull 800 from 832, I'm left with 32 hundredths. So now let's place 32 hundredths. Here's 30. 31, 32. 8 whole groups, and 32 hundredths. So now that all of my decimals are plotted on my number line, and they're all in hundredths, I can write my long comparison statement using my hungry alligator. Starting at the front of my number line, I have 8 and 10 hundredths is less than my next point, 8 and 15 hundredths, which is less than my next point, 8 and 20 hundredths, which is less than my next point, 8 and 27 hundredths, which is less than my last point that I've plotted, 8 and 32 hundredths. On this next page, we have 2 lists that we're going to place in order. This one and this one. For this first list of numbers, we're going to place them all into decimals of hundredths and then put them in order from least to greatest. But before we can do that, let's change them all into decimals of hundredths. 3 tenths, 0 whole groups, and 3 tenths. 3 tenths with no hundredths means that I have 30 hundredths. So we can also rewrite 2 tenths as 20 hundredths. Any other tenths here? I've got 13 tenths. I know that 10 tenths makes a 100. So if I have 13 tenths, that means I have 1 whole group and 3 extra tenths. It's like I'm taking the number 13 and I'm just splitting it with a decimal with 0 in the hundredths place. I also have 4 tenths, so that's 0, 4 tenths, 0 hundredths. 34 hundredths would be written with the number 34 following that decimal. And same for 17 hundredths. It's already in hundredths. So I'm going to place it after the decimal. So now let's put these in order. I learned in yesterday's lesson to start with the whole number. We're going from least to greatest, and all of these are zeros except for our final one here. I know that this has to be my largest one. Okay. Now let's look at our tenths place and find our smallest amount of tenths. 3, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4. It looks like 1 tenth is my smallest, so I'll put it here. My next smallest amount of tenths is my 2 tenths. My next smallest amount of tenths, I have 3 tenths and 3 tenths here, so now I have to look over at that next hundredths place. 0 versus 4, 30 versus 34. 30 is a smaller number. Which means I'm going to put 40 here. For this final problem, we're going to have to use a lot more mental math strategies to figure out where they should go. I'm noticing a lot of 4s. 4 whole groups, 4 ones, 4 and 43 hundredths, 430 hundredths, 4.31. So it's going to be really hard to compare. Are there any numbers that don't have 4 ones? Actually, yeah, this one right here, 34 hundredths, doesn't have any whole groups at all. It's just 0 and 34 hundredths. All right, so now that we've gotten that smallest one out of the way, let's take a look and see 4 ones and what else. Okay. We have 4 ones, 4 ones, 4 ones, 4 ones, 4 ones. So now we got to look at the tenths place. What's the smallest amount of tenths we have? We've got 0 tenths. 33 hundredths would be 3 tenths, so far this is our smallest. 43 hundredths would be 4 tenths, so again, this is our smallest. 430 hundredths, that would be 3 tenths again. This is our smallest. 3 tenths. All right, the next one's going to be 4 and 3 hundredths. All right, we had a lot that were 3 tenths. We had 4.33, 4.43, 4.30, 4.31. So we're really comparing 33, 30, and 31. 30 is going to be our smallest. So we're going to put 4 whole groups in 400 and 30 hundredths next. Then we'll do 31 hundredths next. Then we'll put 33 hundredths after that. Those were really close together. Last but not least, we'll end it on 4 whole groups and 43 hundredths. The goal is that you can become more automatic with this so that you can just look at a mixed number, a fraction, a uniform, and know what its smallest decimal unit would be so that you can compare. So now it's your turn. Grab your problem set and get started.